Let's return to that stash on housing. Labor pressured to do more, including by protesters. Joining me is Labor for Housing co-convenor Julijana Todorovic. Thanks for your time. You were pretty strident that Labor needed to do more. There was this announcement out of National Cabinet yesterday. Has that satisfied you?
Look, it is a fantastic step in the right direction. It is very hard wrangling all the states and territories, and when we're talking about the housing problem, what we're really talking about is a lack of supply. And one of the key barriers to lack of supply is irregular and a mixed match of housing and planning reforms and legislation. What we've seen out of yesterday is we're seeing a unification, and we've seen every state and territory buy in to actually enabling more supply so that we can get those houses on the ground.
We'll go into what they've bought into in a moment, but you supported the move, put forward the motion by Zack Smith. What it eventually said was Labor will increase government invested in social housing and affordable housing with funding from a progressive and sustainable tax system, including corporate tax reform. It's all pretty vague, isn't it? It's a long way from what Zack Smith wanted initially. Does it feel like you've had to support a bit of a nothing motion?
No, not at all. We're taking that to the bank. We are delighted that not only, as we saw out of National Cabinet yesterday, significant planning reforms, significant rental reforms, we also now have a commitment from the Labor Party that we're going to invest in progressive taxation and direct it directly into social and affordable housing. This is a big win for Labor for Housing. This is a big win from the CFMEU, and we are feeling really good about this today.
Would going ahead with stage 3 income tax cuts exactly as they are be in keeping with this motion?
I'm not really here to comment on the stage 3 tax cuts. I've got my own personal views. It's no secret. I'm Assistant Secretary of the Socialist Left in Victoria. You know, I am what it says on the tin. I've got my own views about stage 3 tax cuts, but ultimately I'm not the Treasurer, and that's a decision for the Treasurer and the Finance Minister.
I know, but I'm just asking in the context of the statement. This is the motion you supported of affordable housing funding from a progressive and sustainable tax system. So I'm just asking, is that in keeping, supporting that motion and that motion being passed? Can that live side by side with the stage 3 tax cuts going ahead as they are planned to?
Well, look, the super profits tax, as it's been put by the CFMEU and now as adopted by the Labor Party, is different from stage 3 tax cuts. We're talking about a separate thing. Stage 3 tax cuts is economy-wide, it's across the board, it's looking at a whole lot of taxation cuts for a whole lot of people. What we're talking about here is we're just talking about taxing the 0.5 top % of companies in Australia and making sure that that money is hypothecated into housing. So, you know, we're talking about two different things, and we don't want to get too much into the weeds around this. We're taking this as an absolute win on the floor this morning. We've got the housing chapter coming up this afternoon, and we're really looking forward to more progressive change in housing.
So it's your belief that Labor's effectively adopted that super profits tax, which is a 40% tax on companies with a turnover of more than $100 million. That I don't see that in the motion. I haven't heard any Labor MPs support that, but that's going to go ahead, is it?
So it's not a motion, and I can't speak for the government, but what we did get today is we actually got a commitment that it is a statement of values of the Labor Party that we believe that corporations should be taxed to fund housing. What we need in this country is we need to look at sharing the wealth. I'm sick of hearing that there is not enough money for housing. There is enough money for housing, but we just need to make sure that we're sharing it amongst our community to make sure that everyone has a safe and secure home.
The modelling done by the CFMEU on this, which you're supporting the policy, it talks about all the money that could be raised, which seems like a pretty simple formula. Here are the companies, here's how much money they turn over, here's the tax. But does it look anywhere on the effects on investment in the country? Because it seems like a pretty blunt instrument. Surely you'd have to say, well, are there going to be jobs lost from this? Will there be a lack of investment? What else happens apart from the revenue raising?
Look, I think that's a question for the CFMEU. I think that they've done a really thorough piece of research. It's Oxford Economics that's done it, and I'd probably just go back to their plan to answer that question. As Labor for Housing, we're standing in support of more social and affordable housing. We're standing in support of sharing the wealth between our community members.
All right, I will ask. I haven't got them on the program, but I thought it was worth asking, seeing as you support the policy. But let's get into the housing aspect. So the announcement that we had yesterday, it's big figures, an extra 200,000 houses is what Labor says will be created. Are you at all sceptical about whether it happens? Because it's an incentive plan, right? No state or territory is saying, here's how many we'll build, here's how we get there. The federal government is just hoping through an incentive it will happen. So until we know how they do it, it's just a plan for a plan, isn't it?
So my understanding of the way the package of reforms from yesterday is going to work, and again, it's all very new, it's all very developed. As Labor Housing, we've only had, a quick briefing from the Minister's office. But essentially what it's seeking to do is deal with the biggest problem that we have in housing, which is supply. And looking at the barriers, so looking at planning reforms to make sure that we can actually broaden the amount of housing that we can build. We're also looking at making sure that it's where people want to live. I live in Melbourne and we have a huge urban sprawl problem, particularly in the outer north. So what this seeks to do is actually deal with this infill of housing and making sure that it's where people not only want to live, but where they have access to services. And so it's actually, the aim is to build 1.2 million new houses, and that is going to go a long way to dealing with our absolute crisis that we're in.
And does that necessitate making councils get out of the way? You spoke around planning and people living where they want to. So often we've got the multi-tiered aspect working against new developments or houses because councils can often reduce how many are approved. There's no actual solution to that here, is there? Is that up to the states to sort that out?
Well, every state has a very different relationship with their local governments. Here where we are in Queensland, local governments are 3 or 4 times the size that they are down where I am in Victoria. I don't think it's the role of the federal government to tell the states exactly how they're going to sort out their own relationships with local government. But yeah, I absolutely see that rather than having incredibly internalised issues within local governments, that we actually have a broad plan to increase housing supply across the country.
No rental caps, just once a year that rents can be increased if the states sort of roll that out. We'll see what happens. What did you make of this? Is this a concession that rental caps in many places around the world just haven't worked? Rental increases, I should say, in terms of those caps?
Rental caps are a really interesting one, and rental freezes are a really interesting one. In reality, we've just had a rental freeze. We had a rental freeze over COVID, and look at the state of the rental market now. I think there can be something to be said for rental controls, but when we go in with a blunt instrument like rental caps, a lot of what the data is showing is that tenants get a rough deal because landlords can only charge so much, which means that they're not willing to reinvest that money into making their homes livable. I've been a tenant for many years, and when I was looking for a new tenancy last year, we would line up outside and around the corner, and then we'd walk in with a hole in the wall, and people were trying to charge us $500 a week. I think to some extent we would be seeing more of that if we had rental caps, and I think that the alignment of rental reforms that we've seen out of National Cabinet yesterday is a steer in the right direction.
Julijana Todorovic, appreciate your time today at that Labor conference today. Thank you.
Thank you.